I used it a month to create an animation, and until now, it is somewhat half finished. What? Okay, let's start from the beginning. After finishing my first anime video, I took a break from work and watched some shows on TV. I decided to put on Farina, but after a while I got a bit restless and flipped the channel over to a local movie network. They were playing the first Iron Man, and the exact scene I switched it to was the one where he's dodging the F-22 fighter jets. And right then, it got me thinking, what if Farina fights a fighter jet? Yeah, that's a solid good idea. And so I wrote it down. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the journey I went through trying to turn this idea into a dramatic action animation shot. For this project, I decided to take a more professional step forward. In my first video, one of the biggest flaws I found from my first project is that there is just no management nor documentation. I have no idea which part I am doing right, how much exact time I actually dedicated myself to it, and also there are no comments or reflections being recorded for myself to improve. And so because of this, I went on finding a project management tool for this one. I choose to use Notion, and from this tool I built the platform and settings for my work. And this is what it looks like. The core layout features a centralized status bar to track open tasks alongside an overview of the entire project flow. Moving down, I separated my documentations into dedicated sections for daily comments, creative ideas, and reflections, right next to my production shot checklist. Finally, I established a strict timeline for milestones and a calendar view to visually audit my actual output over the month. This setup is so fulfilling as it not only documents my process, but also gives me the raw analytics I need to evaluate my management efficiency. Now that we have a workspace, we can start developing on the new idea. For this one, I start off with a script, which is a standard practice for any film of course. But for me, this was a massive shift. In the previous video, I don't actually have a script because there wasn't much action or dialogue to keep track of. This one, however, there are more action shots and just more movements. Dialogue is relatively loaded as the short is more action heavy, plus I don't have the resources to hire VAs, nor use AITTS for respect. With many things going on, I wrote everything down into a script just so I won't get lost when doing storyboard. Onto storyboard, it feels way heavier and kinda more exhausted. This short requires heavy actions, meaning the camera has to be placed at dynamic complex angles. The poses are also far more intrigued, like I'm no longer drawing characters from the waist up. I have to map out full bodies, perspective wrapping, and decisive blocking. They all seem pretty epic and look promising, but the obscurity of these shots will later be shown, literally. On the topic of references, I gathered a massive library of it. It basically consists of Arena's official character sheets, episodic screen caps, and references for anime-style jet fighters and aerial backgrounds. There isn't a whole lot of technical stuff to explain here. These references simply served as a visual anchor, ensured that the short captured the anime aesthetic. Now, based on the script and storyboarding, this anime short is gonna involve more than just, well, moving GIFs. One of the few special things about this short is that it is gonna utilize 2D and 3D combination. Most animes, when depicting vehicles, they are all rendered in 3D, which is very noticeable in modern anime films. The reason is that drawing vehicles accurately in different frames is very difficult and exhausting, which leads to productions becoming hybrid in these situations. There are times where vehicles are being hand-drawn, but mostly it is very simplified and only appeared in short segments. More funnier is that sometimes it's just a 3D still frame. As I said in previous videos, I have expertise in the 3D field, so there's not really a problem with that. VFX is also needed as based on the storyboard, there's gonna be a ton of magic used as well as explosions. Finally, on the topic of which to draw first, because most of the shots are taking place in the air, there's no need to draw the backgrounds first like the first anime shot. As this time, it is the characters that mostly guide the perspectives. Now we know our methods, we go on to animate the thing. But before that, we need to set up the 3D model first. Home sweet home. For the 3D part, my software of choice is Blender, the open source 3D animation tool that needs no introduction. Since the primary 3D element I needed was the F-22 fighter jet, I decided to source a free F-22 model from Sketchfab. I also brought in human figures and a 3D model of Arena's staff to act as accurate perspective and posing references. But importing the model was the first step. By default, they all have realistic smooth shading which completely clashes with the anime aesthetic. To fix this, I went on to build a custom cell shader. Cell shading is what gives 3D models that distinct 2D anime look by crushing the smooth gradient into flat, sharp, high contrast shadows. Finally, I inserted the missiles, again downloaded from Sketchfab. Parented them to the jet's hardpoints, so everything moved in as a single cohesive rig, and just like that, pre-production was done. It is really time to actually animate. For the animation pipeline of this project, it was strictly structured like this. I made the 3D animations, then the 2D, and then finally the backgrounds. The 3D animation stage went smoothly. It was mostly a matter of setting up dynamic camera angles and animating the vehicle trajectories. I also posted the human models to establish accurate perspective guides, and even roughed out a few full 3D layout passes. This was a massive help for locking down my timing and composition early on. The 2D animation phases, however, was brutal. It wasn't just maintaining anatomical proportions. I had to track rapid action sequences, tackling complex perspective shifts, and handle high volume in-betweening. On top of that, there was Furina's clothing. The official Furina anime is famous for its hyper-detailed, fluid, garmented animations. Every fold and wind interaction is meticulous, so trying to replicate that level of secondary motion without formal training was incredibly exhausting. Throughout the rough sketching process, things just weren't looking right, and the sheer volume of problems just left me overthinking and paralyzed it when it came time for cleanups. On top of this, I switched to a completely new line art workflow. In my previous video, I used a standard raster-based brush, which means that if I need to rescale a drawing, the image quality will loosen. Also in tight corners, the bucket fill tool always leaves annoying unpainted gaps, which requires manual repainting and is a major burden. To solve this, I switched it to vector-based line art. Because vectors calculates lines mathematically using anchor points and curves, I could resize, wrap, and realign my line art infinitely without ever losing quality or redrawing. However, this new workflow came with its own flaws too. Sometimes areas weren't just completely unfillable, either because the vector lines didn't properly connect, or well, the software just refused to cooperate, forcing me to tweak and wiggle lines around until it finally worked. And yes, it crashes too. While the distance shots and simple profile faces were easy enough to manage, the heavy action cuts absolutely drained me. I kept on drawing, cleaning, and animating frame after frame. Eventually, I actually burned myself down. During the first few days, I was pushing incredibly hard. In week 1, I logged at around 25 hours of raw production time, but by week 2, that momentum dropped drastically to 17 hours, and it kept declining until week 4, where I only managed to 14 hours. With each passing week, every animation session felt worse than the last. I was burning out hard from overthinking every single frame. Opening the software didn't excite me anymore. I felt like I was losing the core mentality of an artist. I was no longer enjoying the actual process of creating. No, we're not getting this today. We're sticking to the numbers. Look at my Notion calendar. The data showed a complete lack of consistency. There are days where I had only squeezed it in a single half-hearted session, under an hour, contrasted by random days where I aggressively grinded for 2 to 4 hours straight. My workflow was completely fractured, and time was just slipping away fast. To make matters worse, I managed to injure my drawing fingers twice, which completely prevented me from typing or drawing for days. One morning, the accumulated stress caught up to me and I physically woke up sick. And to top it all off, I somehow accidentally ended up quitting my internship due to toxic work conditions. It wasn't my fault, but I suddenly have to dedicate precious time to job hunting again. Though honestly, going full-time YouTube sounds way better than finding a job now. Clearly, just from what I said, I'm not balancing my life like actually healthy. By the 4th week, opening Notion felt entirely different than it did on day 1. My clean workspace had turned into an absolute mess, and I started to doubt about the pipeline itself. Was the status bar even a task tracker anymore, or was it just an autopsy report of my broken work session? The short checklist wasn't tracking complete shots, it was only tracking if the animation sketch was done, completely ignoring the coloring, line art, and final composition. I am really just lost here, and the thought of spending an entire day just restructuring the database felt like a massive waste of time. I'm basically caught in a cycle of being incredibly harsh on myself. From all the exhaustion and overwhelmingness and time being running out, I decided to do something highly discouraged yet fundamentally necessary. Corner cutting. Looking back at the storyboard, I decided to make some hard compromises. First, I cut a complex sequence of Furina flying. I was inspired by the Millennium Falcon navigating the astral field in Star Wars, and given the sheer complexity of the animation movement, it just wasn't feasible to do it quickly and with quality. Next, I had a massive plan to animate a first-person POV fighting sequence where Furina battles a monster before being transported to the F-22 dogfight. I completely reworked that into a series of static, stylized flash frames with muffled audio. making it feel like a faded memory instead. Cutting these sequences was incredibly disappointing. It felt like I was ruining true vision, yet it still wasn't enough. There were still crucial action shots left to clean up, shots that were simply too vital to the narrative to cut. And I was still determined to deliver an epic fight scene here. But looking at the cold hard data from the past 4 weeks, it's just the reality was really clear. Between my lack of consistency, my slow production pace, and the exhaustion of trying to play every single studio role myself, I projected that finishing this animation would take another 2 to 3 months of grueling non-stop daily work. Pushing through under those conditions would just result in a rushed, low-quality product that wouldn't be worth the toll it was taking. Staying trapped in this loop was also preventing me from learning other high-beneficial skills. Plus, while working on this, my head began to fill up with a ton of fresh, exciting animation project ideas I want to explore on. Getting stuck on a single massive project for months, especially when it's only the second video of my channel, felt like a creative dead end here. Of course, announcing that I was stopping my second ever animation video felt incredibly embarrassing, but after weighing everything with absolute consideration, I made a definitive decision. This animation short is done. For now. Over half the shots are either completely polished or have their rough animations finalized. The bulk of what's left is background painting, composition, and VFX, the exact areas that are entirely new and exciting to me. This isn't about me being lazy or easily distracted. It's a calculated decision backed entirely by production data. And also, to be clear, I'm not cancelling this project. It is simply a temporary halt. And one day, when my skill finally matched my ambition, the rest of the storyboards will actually be finished. And I still deeply believe in this concept, and I know it can be an incredible short film. So with this decision, I exported the finished animation files, and we can finally move on to new territories. As stated before, the backgrounds were reserved for the final stage of production, but that doesn't mean it was easy. In terms of drawing the sky, fast aerial shots require constant seamless tiling, and also repetitive movements and drastic camera arcs mean standard flat artwork wouldn't cut it. I have to massively upscale backgrounds and calculate complex multi-point perspectives to match the dynamic movement of the 2D and 3D assets. For scenes that are shown aerial, I went a bit efficiently by just getting some random photos of mountains and flat rocky areas, then cut it down and stick with a sky background. For aerial shots towards the ground, I optimized my workflow by photo bashing. Basically, I took real landscape of mountains and rocky terrain, and then just put some clouds flowing around. Some of the complex backgrounds to handle were the close-up interior shots of the cockpit controls. Fortunately, like the last video, I was able to manage these through simple blocking, texturing, and stylize the lighting passes to make it cinematic and feel clean. With the assets and backgrounds finally secured, I imported everything into DaVinci Resolve's Fusion panel, which is an alternative After Effect, to begin the composition phase. Most scenes are basically having the backgrounds combined with the animation, then layered it on some camera shakes, motion blurs, and lens distortions. These effects stimulated real camera tracking and cockpit vibrations, just like how dogfights are depicted in real movies, making the action feel more incredibly dramatic and naturally directing the viewer's eyes. For the high-speed first-person POV tracking shots, I animated the backgrounds itself moving at extreme speeds, which made the shots so high adrenaline. From here, everything was finally almost finished, and the footage was looking incredibly promising. But right as I was about to wrap up, I stared at the timeline and realized a massive glaring problem. I completely forgot to animate VFX, and I don't know anything about it. So we're learning again. Since I have no knowledge of VFX, I have to do some research by following some YouTube tutorials. Through this, I was able to understand the core methodology of anime VFX. It's basically a hard combination of hand-drawn geometric shapes that gets heavily manipulated later during the composition phase. For the magical elements and the trailing missile flares, I roughed out the defined shaped line art first. Then in post-production I layered on Gaussian blur, self-stylistic glows, and noise textures to make them look organic. The explosions, however, were an entirely different thing. I completely struggled to grasp the core physics of it, like how the smoke volume should expand, how the shape should dissipate, or just how the keyframes should change form over time. Because of this, my explosions turned out looking like those old school Newgrounds Flash animations. It's just flat, lack of dynamic color depth, and easily became the most frustrating complex VFX hurdle of the entire project. With all that done, everything is ready as should be. So, without further ado, this is what the result looks like.
年 会時間ではないはずだけど、アウラ、お前の前にいるのは。そう、外交ごっこはもう終わり。言っておくけど私強いよ。
Looking back at it, these semi-finished cuts actually look pretty decent, but honestly, it's the composition and the camera effect doing the heavy lifting here. Despite how promising it looks overall, there are still a few glaring issues that I'm not thrilled with it. For starters, the way the F-22 fires its missile is completely fundamentally inaccurate. The real F-22 Raptor has their missiles being stored internally. They even explicitly show this mechanism in that Iron Man scene I mentioned it earlier. Yet in my video, I slapped the missiles directly onto the wings. Why did I do that? Why did I stick them outside when those internal missiles loaders were literally fully modeled right there? Why did I choose this specific jet fighter when there are other dozen jet fighters with wing-mounted hardpoints that I can use? Honestly, I don't know. Maybe I was just trying to rage bait the aviation fanbase. Another major inconsistency is the art direction. Sometimes the style jumps all over the place, especially the backgrounds. Like it goes from standard generic anime style backdrops to suddenly highly detailed Makoto Shinkai level cinematic cockpit background. Hold on, let's look at this close-up of Furina right before the missile impacted her. Seriously. What happened to the proportions? Overall, those are really my only major complaints for now. I don't know if I'll ever go back and fix these specific errors in the future, but I think I'm gonna take that break first. Overall, this experience taught me infinitely more than I ever expected. Not only now that I utilize a management tool to manage and identify problems, the effects, and diving into complex composition, but also a lesson in self-reflection, where I honestly assess my current capabilities and boundaries across different disciplines. Without this, I wouldn't have developed the pipeline I need to create work I'm genuinely proud of. I would have just kept blindly grinding myself where I cannot progress and wasting time. This animation short really pushed my stress limit and truly made me respect just how brutal the animation craft can be. But with this finally out of the way, I can redirect my energy towards other projects I've been dreaming of creating, which, don't worry, they won't be as crushing or overscoped as this one. And of course, based on this experience, I will take this data-driven framework with me to evaluate whether the next project I'm doing is actually realistically executable. And that brings us to the end. Thank you so much for watching. I know it might feel a bit disappointing to see the project wrapping up when it's only half finished, but the core narrative and the visual concepts are there. And I wanted to be fully transparent with everyone about the reality of this process. It might be hard to visualize right now, but when this short finally gets the full production it deserves down the road, it will be well worth the wait. Anyway, thanks for being here, and I'll see you all in a future video. Bye!